I'm saying it right now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. We'll get started in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and a Denver Startup Week co-founder. Denver Startup Week has always been about community. And today, it's more important than ever to show how we can come together to create opportunities out of the challenges that we face. Opportunities for every member of the community. Before we dive in, we want to say a special thank you to our 2020 Denver Startup Week sponsors who make it all possible. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Xero. And our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support at Denver Startup Week. You help make all of this possible. Denver Startup Week. You
At Zayo, our fiber fuels global innovation. Everything we do, everything we can imagine. Never in history has innovation happened at such a rapid pace. And all of it depends on bandwidth connectivity. Millions of miles of Zayo's fiber span the globe, traveling unique routes, providing dense metro footprints, offering next-generation solutions. We didn't just see the future of fiber, we built it. We delivered it. Every millisecond, our fiber is fueling crucial operations, breakthroughs, and innovations for the world's most impactful companies. Companies that are disrupting the status quo, igniting imaginations, revolutionizing industries, and creating brand new ones. Our customers are advancing wireless communication, transforming healthcare, changing education, revolutionizing transportation, redefining banking, powering retail, and upping the game in esports. These innovators rely on Zayo's fast, secure fiber networks to connect their offices, factories, data centers, clouds, exchanges, venues, and more. Ultimately, fueling innovation and transforming lives. And behind those fiber connections, Zayo is all about human connections. We take ownership in all we do. Our employees take the initiative to deliver trusted solutions to every customer and make their experience effortless. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next, constantly anticipating what can be. We are fueling global innovation that is changing the world. At Zayo, our fiber
Hey, John, we can't hear you. Can you hear him? Why don't we go to Tammy's?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tammy Dorr, and I serve as CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership. As one of the co-founders of Denver Startup Week, we couldn't be more pleased to have you all here virtually. With that said, today and throughout the week, you're going to be hearing from entrepreneurs, big, bold ideas and visions, but you're also going to have the opportunity to hear more about how some of the larger companies in our community are coming together to build a place and a space where Coloradans can work for the betterment of Colorado. Today, we're here to talk about Thrive. In 2018, Kent Thiry, former CEO and chairman of DaVita, reached out to 14 CEOs of some of the larger enterprises in Colorado. He asked them to come together to begin to explore how business could make an impact for the betterment of all in our state. These 14 CEOs took the call to action, came together, and formed Thrive. I'd like to start by having each of our panelists today introduce themselves, and then we're going to hear a little bit more about the vision behind Thrive and what the hopes and dreams are, as well as the clear-cut goals. Let me start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Teresa Taylor, could you begin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you for having me today. So I'm Teresa Taylor. I spent 25 years at Quest, which is now CenturyLink, where I departed as the Chief Operating Officer. And now I'm doing public company work on board of directors for T-Mobile and Black Hills Energy. And thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Mike Freeze.
Am I unmuted? Got
Yes.
me?
You're unmuted.
I'm
It wouldn't
unmuted.
be a virtual panel if
And
somebody
it was such a
did
good
unmute.
introduction. I was really rolling.
I was
Anyway, Mike
inspired.
Freeze. I'm the CEO of Liberty Global. I've been CEO for 15 years. I was a co-founder of the business 30 years ago. We are one of the largest fixed mobile providers outside the U.S. So we reach almost 80 million mobile and fixed broadband customers in Europe, another 15 million or so in Latin America. So we're sort of like Comcast outside the U.S., but we add Verizon or T-Mobile into that. So we're in the communications and connectivity space. Great to be here.
Great, thank you. And how about we go to Steve Rendell, one of our newer CEOs in town. We are so excited to have VF in our family of companies in Denver.
Great, thank you for having me. So quick introduction, I'm Steve Rendell, Chairman and CEO of VF Corporation. I've been in my role for just a little over 3.5 years. Many of you may not know who VF is. Give you some quick overview. We're a 110-year-old company. We're Fortune 250, and you'll know us most of all for the brands in our portfolio, brands like Vans, The North Face, Timberland, and Dickies. We moved to Denver last year as part of a significant set of actions we've taken to transform our company. And Denver was just a perfect place for us to bring our outdoor brands, and with that, a set of our corporate executive leaders to co-locate with our businesses is a really important part of driving our purpose and, most importantly, enabling our brands to continue to scale. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. And Steve, if you were here, you would see that your brands are well represented in this room. So thank you. Dan Caruso, a fixture at Denver Startup Week. You've always been a great partner. It's good to have you here with us.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I've been part of 3 startups, all of which have been in the fiber and bandwidth space, and all 3 of which have had exits for north of 10 billion. So it's been interesting to be part of this industry, the industry I'm in, from really when it began, when competition first began with the local bell companies, through when the internet became commercialized, all the way to today when the industry continues to move forward. Much more consolidated today. But it's one of those industries that has many years and decades in front of it. And Colorado's a great home for a business like ours.
Tammy, I
Thanks,
have
Dan.
to say, you're promoting VF brands, you're showing Zayo videos, you're clearly shaming me for not being a bigger sponsor of this event next year, for sure.
You guys are amazing partners of our city, so there's no shaming there. You guys have been great partners. I'll think of more to say by the end of this panel, kind of even it out.
Okay.
Dan, why don't we start with you? Can you talk a little bit about how Thrive came to be, and also why you chose your first focus area of economic mobility?
Sure. So as you said in your introduction, it was Kent Thiry who really was the spark behind Colorado Thrives. He began reaching out to several of us individually, a lot of us had relationships. And I think what we share in is a passion for two things. One, we believe that economic vitality of a community is really important. If you have thriving companies, there's opportunities that are available. And then we believe in the second thing that's equally as important, and that is we want the benefit of these thriving companies to move across the entire communities that we live and work in. So it was a group of people who kind of had both the mission of let's make this economy better and better, but not just for ourselves or people like us. Let's spend the time and effort and collaboration to think of how this can have a broad impact to our community. And economic mobility, we debated quite a bit on what themes might really bring us together. And well before the current situation that we're all dealing with today, we centered on economic mobility. We centered on the theme of we want the environment that we're part of here to be shared much more broadly. We want to bring more people into it, both directly into the scaling of companies, into entrepreneurial and startup scene, but also with all the other companies that get supported because of a real strong economy. So how do we reach in to the communities that are often overlooked or who have tougher access to get into this? How do we create pathways and lean into bringing them in?
Well, it's really exciting, and we have believed for a long time at the Downtown Denver Partnership and in our business community that great cities are really built by great businesses, meaning that if business thrives and gives back, both in thought leadership, financial investment, and in jobs, that it really changes people's lives. And so, it's exciting to see you all have planted the seed and are growing these ideas. I know there are a couple initial projects kind of coming out of this focus of economic mobility. Maybe, Mike, could you talk a little bit about the work with Techstars?
Sure. And maybe just to add quickly to what Dan said, we did look, as he said, at a host of areas, because when BCG did the work on Colorado, there's a lot of things going well and a lot of things that can go better. We looked at transportation, education, affordable housing, and mental health. But economic mobility, as you mentioned, felt to us as the right place for companies like ours with hundreds of thousands of employees and the will and ability to get the economy moving to focus on. And one of the first things we did was launch a workforce development accelerator. We're partnered with Techstars. I'm sure everybody on the video knows Techstars up in Boulder. We also brought in Zoma Labs, which is a local nonprofit founded by Ben Walton and his wife, Luciana, and Strata Education Network, which is a social impact fund focused on really bringing education and employment together and making sure that those who are educated can find that job. So it's a workforce development accelerator. We're going to try to address the challenges in this current labor market. And more specifically, we're looking for companies that can do one of four things. And this is, pretty literal. We want companies that can democratize access to high quality training, networks and jobs. We want companies that can enable individuals to make informed decisions about their job, their career. Looking for companies that promote and increase awareness of non-degree pathways to employment, and companies that support businesses in closing skill gaps. Techstars, as you may know, usually finds 10 to 12 startups, and we have found 10 nonprofits, and we're now searching for 2 nonprofits. And Thrives is funding the nonprofits to go through the exact same program as the for-profit companies. The accelerator kicks off in November. I think the demo day is in February. We're really thrilled with some of these companies. I'll just read out a couple of the companies we found in the for-profit area. There's a company that provides childcare solutions for a flexible workforce, a company that facilitates unbiased alternative financing for Black and brown businesses, a company that has a tech platform that makes it possible and, more importantly, practical for employees to hire individuals who've been affected by the criminal justice system. A company that provides a virtual mentorship platform for Black and Latinx employees, a software platform that provides mock interviews with instant feedback, uses AI and all of that. So that's just a few examples. We also put a very big emphasis on diversity. So 9 of the 10 for-profit startups have diverse CEOs, and 7 of the 10 have diverse founding teams. So we can't wait to get this started. It's going to be, I think, really exciting. There's other examples I can speak to, but I'll let others chime in on the questions. So.
It's really exciting that the goals are so clear. I think that the way you outline them, it's easy for people to understand. Sometimes these social issues or even just the concept of economic mobility is so big that it's hard for people to translate it, what it doesn't mean tactically. So it'll be interesting to hear more about what comes out of Techstars.
Yeah.
Teresa, can you talk a little bit more about some of the projects coming out? I know you're working closely with Endeavor.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add, also with Colorado Thrive. So what we do is a lot of programs come to this group looking for partnership or sponsorship or insights. And so we also go through a little bit of a process, as Mike had mentioned, we pick Techstars to work with. So we're constantly looking for organizations to partner with. And that's really what we use as our foundation to then support other groups. So Endeavor is another one that we're involved with. A couple of us are actually on their board too. And Endeavor is a global organization that supports high growth, scaling entrepreneurs in 65 cities across the world. And we just opened a Colorado chapter just this last year. So that was pretty exciting for us to actually have Colorado as one of those locations. We said Colorado because we didn't focus on Denver. We're actually focusing on the whole Front Range. And similar to what Mike talked about is it's a selection process. So what we do is we pick companies apply, and then we select them to actually be in the program, which is a very programmatic sort of approach where they have mentoring, they have access to the global network. Just give an example of two companies I'm working with as I mentor them, the CEO in particular, trying to scale up and work in that area. So very focused on Colorado. We picked two companies this year. We only picked two so we can really, really help them and really focus on making a difference. So that's one of the programs that Colorado Thrives in and Endeavor are partnered together on.
So Endeavor's been a participant in Denver Startup Week before. And when we helped launch Detroit Startup Week, we also had some good connections with Endeavor there. So it's great to see that they're, building a home here in Colorado under your all leadership.
Yep.
Back to you, Dan, for another example of a project that you all are working on. Can you talk a little bit about E4All?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think of startups, most of us go straight to tech companies, software companies, companies that are in maybe Boulder or downtown Denver. But there's a whole nother type of startup that's maybe more important than those kind. And that's startups that take place in other communities, communities that are more about everyday businesses, but there's people in those communities who have business ideas, who have a commitment to start a business, and they need help scaling up their business. So E4All is an organization that was formed in 2010, actually in Massachusetts, and they set their sights on expanding into Colorado as their second community. And with Brad Feld's help, with help from the Crusoe Foundation, help from Colorado Thrives, we supported them as they launched their first market within Colorado, which is Longmont. So they're picked communities that are not the Boulders and Denvers. They're the Longmonts, Pueblos, Auroras, where they then work in a similar fashion with aspiring entrepreneurs who have a business idea, who want to get mentorship and support, and also the benefit of a broader network. The one in Longmont started about a year and a half ago or so. They completed their first cohort of companies, and there's one in particular that I want to talk a little bit about. And it's an entrepreneur that I just recently met by the name of Diego. And Diego, although he's part of the Longmont Accelerator, actually lives in Denver. He has a company called Champa that just got launched. It's all about the software to attract a workforce that consists of, I think the center point is like day workers. So if you have the need for people to do work in a certain capacity, this application speaks to those people. It's both English and Spanish, but it caters toward the Hispanic population and toward the kind of jobs that are kind of the more blue-collarish work that people are looking for. So it's an interesting idea, but the other ideas that will come out of that, it could be anything from a restaurant to a to a barber shop, to really the everyday businesses you expect to see in and around the communities that we live and work. So part of the mission of Colorado Thrives is this isn't about kind of tech startups and more of that. It's about the broader community that we're part of, and how do we support people who aspire to be entrepreneurs and want to get into that ecosystem in all parts of our communities. And E for All.
It's also a great example of how we're allocating talent. I mean, what we're doing with them is providing a little capital, but mostly helping them with a strategic plan. And then I know 6 Liberty Global employees have become mentors of these small business entrepreneurs. And it's a great opportunity for my employees to use their skills, give back to the community. So it's a good example of how we take, how we are able to sort of leverage the talent of our organizations to grow these platforms.
Well, I do want to volunteer that Denver Startup Week and the Commons on Champa are always available to collaborate and merge our collective ecosystems as you continue this work. So please keep that top of mind. As we talk about some of the work of Thrive, and we look at it on a macro scale and how do we think about it in terms of the entire community, you all are critical leaders at some of our largest companies. And how you lead inside those companies around economic mobility is just as important as how you lead outside. Steve, VF has a really tremendous reputation for looking at the community at large, but I'm curious, how do you see as a leader impacting economic mobility within your company as well?
Yeah, no, we have been spending a lot of time, as you might imagine, thinking about this exact question. And I mentioned earlier, that we have been under a transformation of sorts for the last 3.5 years, of which one key aspect of that was our focus on inclusion and diversity, and really focusing first on inclusion. And if we can create a truly inclusive culture, then we can absolutely attract a more diverse, set of leaders and talent to drive our business. And I think central for us is, we are one of the world's largest apparel and footwear, companies with the portfolio of brands that we have. And, we saw very quickly, that for us to be successful, we needed an employee base that really reflected our consumers. It's very hard to create great products for women if you have a number of white males trying to sit around the design question that you're trying to solve. And even more importantly, as we've grown from an inner city standpoint, we need that Black and Latino mindset in our product creation, our demand creation and experience thinking to really attract and provide relevant content for our consumers. So as we think about economic mobility, for us, it's more about economic justice and really, taking it further and into the ethnic communities that have been impacted so much. And how can we, as a employer, attract the great talent, that helps us to create, compelling products and experiences that speak to consumers. And as we do that, we create value for our shareholders and stakeholders. So there's really 2 sides for us. There's that professional financial aspect of driving a successful business that benefits our shareholders. But then there's the other side of being a purpose-led organization and truly doing things that power movements of sustainable and active lifestyles for both people and our planet. And central to this is our focus around economic equality.
I want to put a shout out there. If you haven't visited the VF site or taken time to understand how they've framed their goals, their vision, their mission, I think it's rather inspiring, and it offers a great framework regardless of the size of company. So for our startups out there, dig into a little bit about how VF has set themselves up in terms of telling their story. I think, Steve, you and your team have done an incredible job.
Thank you.
Let me ask Mike the same question. When you look at your company, your employees, how do you bring that same concept of economic mobility into your company?
Well, maybe focusing on the economic mobility issue. We're a smaller headquarters here in Denver, maybe 150 people, and then 30,000 people outside the U.S. 80% are working from home, by the way. And here in Denver, because we're smaller, we really are focusing on the community. We're reaching out. And as you may know, we support many organizations in town, probably 50 different organizations, but most of them are really focused on youth education and development. It's our view that this next generation of leaders, workers, employees, we have to help them have a fair shot at the dream. And to do that, you really have to give them a fair shot at education. And so we invest in schools, we invest in social emotional programs, anything that can help young people advance and get that shot. So we do quite a bit of that. Outside the U.S., we're fortunate in that we have, Dan has the long haul networks. We're the local loop. So we have, tens of millions of customers who rely on us for connectivity. And we all know through this crisis that connectivity has been an essential and critical service for families, for hospitals, for businesses. And so we're doing everything we can. We decided to actually make economic mobility one of our core platforms in addition to diversity and inclusion, because we know there's a massive digital divide, that there are children who aren't able to learn online because they don't have computers or internet access. And so, giving people the digital skills and access they need to be on a level playing field is a huge, we think, an accelerator for economic mobility, both in this community, but most importantly in the communities that we serve, where there's underprivileged folks who don't have that same opportunity. So there's a couple examples of what we're doing.
And I do think sometimes what gets lost in our society today is that the impacts on society from the products and services brought forth by business can drive economic mobility in and of themselves. Sure. And I think the more that we can show the value in that, the better people can understand the impact of business on taking care of those in need in our community or addressing underrepresented communities. So on that same note, can I ask Teresa, when you hear these stories from Mike and Steve about what they're looking at internally, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs as they think about how they can make an impact, especially if their companies are smaller or early stage?
Yeah. So I think a couple things. So I want to introduce another term into this diversity and inclusion. That's equity. So at the two large companies I deal with, I'll use T-Mobile as an example. We call it DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason we talk about equity is even if you think you have diversity inside your company, whether it's big or small, you still have to ask yourself, do I have equity? And by equity, I mean, does everybody have the same opportunity to move up in the company? Does everybody have the same opportunity to be on the great projects? Does everybody have the same opportunity to have education or sponsorship? And what you find, I think, whether it's a small or large company, is you may bring in diverse employees at the entry level, but you don't see them at the top still. You don't see gender diversity, you don't see racial diversity. And so whether you're big or small, I would just encourage everybody to focus on that entire picture. And then inside the company, again, it's really the culture that you set from the top down. Whether you're the CEO of a gigantic company or the CEO of two people, you set that tone from the very first day of what people expect. They watch you, and the culture that you set becomes very important. You need to walk the talk. Whether you're inside the company or you're, as Mike said, even pushing money outside the company, it needs to be a consistent cultural message that people know you're serious about it. You're just not checking the box because it's the cool thing to say right now, but that you're really digging in, both internally and externally.
Well, and right now it's really easy to just make a checklist and look really good on paper as a company. And I really, implore CEOs and entrepreneurs out there to follow your lead and focus on things, no matter how hard they are, that actually make an impact. And an impact now is more important than ever. And I'm really curious, Dan, as you look at Thrive and some of the other work that you're doing within your own company, how has the pandemic, social unrest, the economy, how is it impacting some of the work that you're doing? But why is it even more important that we're doing this work now?
Yeah, let me start with the pandemic. And I don't want to focus on the pandemic itself. I want to focus on what could be the aftermath of the pandemic. I mean, we might be entering kind of a period of time where a lot of businesses are going to struggle to come back, and a lot of parts of our economy will face some very difficult times. You know, we had a haves have-nots problem going into the pandemic. If anything, that's going to come out in much more significant way, where tech type companies are going to do well during and maybe even better after the pandemic, while traditional businesses are going to struggle. So we need more than ever companies who can provide the leadership, can stimulate the economy, and we need leaders of those companies to not just be thinking about the four walls of their company and how they prosper, but how they can bring the community along with them, how they can use their platforms to create opportunities. And that directly kind of parlays into the question of racial equality and inequality that's front and center right now. That's an important issue. It was an important issue a year ago, 5 years ago, and it will continue to be an important issue 5 years from now. But I think what we've learned during this period is we still don't have it figured out. You know, we think we're making progress, but the pace of progress maybe not be as steep as it needs to be, and we might still be missing some key parts. So I know for me, and I've spent a fair amount of time with other people that are part of Thrives, especially with Steve, and we're doing some soul searching. We're asking ourselves the hard questions. What do we need to be doing, both as leaders of our companies, but also as leaders in the community, to be making a bigger difference? What's the pathway to do that? I'd like to say we have all the answers. We don't, but we do know that we need to take it even more seriously than we have in the past.
I've
Dan,
found on
go
this
ahead.
point. Oh, sorry.
Who is jumping in?
I
Go
was-
ahead.
I
Mike,
was-
it's all
yeah,
yours.
go off of Dan there. One thing that any size company can focus on is supplier diversity. You know, so everyone's got suppliers, whether you're big or small, and to really look at that hard too and say, do I have diversity in who I'm buying and selling to in that area? So again, to Dan's point, there's going to be some companies that are really going to struggle with this pandemic. And so I think it'd be helpful if we all really focused on supplier diversity.
Really,
I was going to validate another point Dan made, which was, you know, tone at the top. You know, we like everybody, we've got a very significant cross-functional group established. We've hired, you know, a firm to help us really think this through. We're doing a lot of soul searching and internal analysis and data analysis of our own workforce to understand, you know, its makeup and researching and trying to get feedback. I'd say on one hand, it's really useful to have these cross-functional groups to get buy-in from your teams. You have to have that. On the other hand, you know, you can't let that stop progress. You know, you have to really, somebody said walk the walk. You really have to, I think, lead from the front on this and don't let this sort of work bog down or become so complex and so democratic that nothing actually gets done. And so I'm finding that I have to keep pushing. And, you know, we don't need another 60 days of research, you know, and I think that's critical. Now in the small companies, it's usually a small company. So you have a beautiful opportunity to start out right. Most of us run big companies where to make the numbers work, it's going to take a long time to bring in, you know, young graduates and retention, and we're all going to do it, but it's going to take time. But with small companies, man, you can get to 50% overnight because you're a small company. So you have an opportunity to really move the needle and start out right. Whereas a lot of us are fixing issues because this has been a systemic problem for so long.
Well, and we are fixing issues both in companies and our society. Steve, I'm curious. We as a country have been through these conversations over and over and over. And it ebbs and flows in terms of interest and commitment to making moves. Is it different this time? Do you see something different in how corporate America, entrepreneurs, society is looking at how we address inclusiveness, diversity, and equity?
Yeah, Tammy, I hope so. I really personally hope so. And I guess from a professional standpoint within VF, this is a particular point of change for us. I mean, we had already had a deep commitment. And, you know, last week in a chamber panel, I spoke about some of the metrics we put in place that we hold ourselves accountable to, not only to our employees, but, you know, to our board. And we communicate this to Teresa's point, with our suppliers. And, are they doing the same work, to change? And are we seeking new suppliers from a much more diverse, community? But I'm afraid that if corporations like ours, like Mike's, like Dan's, the work that Teresa does on boards, if we're not driving this, I'm afraid it could get lost in all the other conversations that hit us day to day, especially here in the political environment we live in the United States. This must change. And if for no other reason, we need thriving communities. Thriving communities, mean thriving businesses. And, thriving businesses provide opportunity. And if we're focused on economic equity and helping mobilize all of us so we can have a point or an opportunity to succeed, that's how we will be able to change. And within VF, my employees will hold me accountable. We've had a lot of conversations and we've made commitments. We're now at a point of action, and we must be very focused. We got to pick things that we can do, but we don't have time. This has to change if we hope to be able to change really the landscape by which people have the opportunity to achieve their dreams. And if we can do that, we create a thriving environment for consumers to come forward, purchase the products that we make, and the flywheel begins to spin. So I hope that this is the point that we can drive change from.
We do tend to, at times as a community or society, fall into this vortex of conversation versus, a ladder of action. And I think what you all are saying as leaders is that it's time for action and we'll deliver results. And I do think that's inspiring, and it helps pave a path for other people to see how they can make a difference. We have some questions coming in from our viewers. Outside of economic mobility and diversity, is there one social issue that you individually are most passionate about that you feel Thrive directly addresses? So maybe a little bit more specificity. Mike, what really stands out to you?
Well, I think, we have, as an organization, I think we started with the right topic, which is economic mobility. Nobody anticipated when we got this going that we'd be in this environment today. So in many ways, we're really in the slot here with the work we're doing on economic mobility and workforce development. As an organization, what's been really, for me, very satisfying is each of us is more than willing to share information, best practices, data. And so whether it's COVID and dealing with the pandemic or dealing with this particular issue of social unrest in our communities, we are in the midst of working very, very closely together. Of the other topics that we looked at, the things that we have investigated, there are so many. I think we all felt moved by the mental health issue in this state. Again, I have a smaller headquarters here, but for those with larger organizations, I think mental well-being, mindfulness, mental health, just physical health, these are things that are all part of the equation for economic mobility. You can't succeed if you're not feeling well, if you aren't well. It's a complex issue. We may tackle it at some point, but it's one that I think we would all, we have a very soft spot for because, as professionals, as leaders, we're always trying to balance our own mental well-being and health. And we know how hard that is for those who don't have the advantages that we have. So that's one topic that I think we all sort of, did some soul searching on. The question for us is, how can we affect change in that area? What can we do to improve the numbers? And the numbers aren't good for Colorado, by the way. That's what got our attention. The numbers are not good for Colorado on multiple measures when it comes to the mental health and well-being of our community. So there's one example.
Great. Teresa, did something stand out to you specifically?
Well, I think when we first formed, we zeroed in on workforce development for a little while and then expanded it to economic mobility. But what we kept hearing over and over in all the research that we had and all the speakers that we had was that we just have this mismatch of what jobs are available and what people are educated for. And that just seems so odd in this great state of Colorado. And the numbers just don't work. And so we spent a lot of time on how to fix that, how to work on that, how to create partnerships. And a couple of programs we're doing are focused on that. But I don't think we're giving up on that. We morphed a little bit into economic mobility, but it has that underlying structure of workforce development, which is what caught my attention in joining the group.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, earlier you talked about how you can't have necessarily a full democratic process within your companies to determine next steps. Some of this is a little bit more command and control, drive action, get results. But it's also on a topic that requires a great deal of vulnerability as a leader, because there's a level of having to say, maybe we're not there. Maybe I don't know how to get us there. How are you individually dealing with that in terms of a leadership style, making yourself vulnerable while trying to drive a clear course of action? Dan, you get to start.
I get the hard question.
You do. It's a good one. Go
No,
deep.
it's a perceptive question, because you do feel vulnerable in this topic in general. It's easy to do missteps, and the price for a misstep can be quite high. There can be lawsuits if you say the wrong thing or in the wrong way, even if your intention was right. Or if trying to correct things, you expose kind of problems within the company that others might leverage. So there is that overhang to this issue, even what words to use and how to use them. We don't always get those right, especially because we got lots of things on our mind. When this issue first started popping up, I received a note from a couple employees, and it was after I sent a note to our employees relative to Juneteenth, and then announcement we had about a panel that we were going to have of external leaders who are African American leaders of companies who were going to speak to Zayo employees. Well, I got a note from a couple employees of the company, and they were very critical. So I said, well, let's hop on a Zoom. So I hop on a Zoom, and I didn't know these employees are fairly junior. It was two guys in their early mid-20s, and they brought one other person along, and they wanted to, they really wanted to challenge me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, using words like, you are white privilege. I'm like, okay, maybe, I don't know. I know where I grew up, and where I grew up was a very blue collar neighborhood, and most people have to fend for themselves, but it put me in a very uncomfortable situation, but at the same time one that I walked away from and thought a lot about.
Thanks for sharing that, because I do think that sometimes it is hard when you get those kinds of responses. Sometimes you feel like you're on the right track, you're doing something good, and the perception or the questions around it make it more challenging. Steve, have you had any similar experiences?
Yeah, and Dan and I've spent some time talking about this, and his panel that he brought together was, he was gracious enough to allow a few of us to join, was really, really insightful and impactful. For us, when the protests, when the horrible tragedy of George Floyd, hit the airwaves, it hit our employee base extremely hard. And, our head of I&D is a black gentleman who moved to Denver, left a very, comfortable environment where he understood racial bias and knew how to react to it. And as he entered a new community, there's more uncertainty. And he and I spent some time on the phone that weekend, and it was emotional. And as we spoke, so much of what he related to me, fear, not so much for himself, but fear for his son, for his family, for his friends. It prompted us to activate a number of listening sessions. And we had 4 or 5 listening sessions for our US employees, where we averaged about 1,300 employees per listening session. And it was a time where we could come together and share. We could get emotional. It was in an environment where it was we were free to speak what was in our heart and on our mind, and it was a point of healing. But for me, what I walked away from, and as I spoke to a few of the employees who shared openly, was I can't relate to the fears and the anxiety and the pure tension that lives in our Black and brown employees. And there's no way they can make me feel good about that. I needed to embrace this point of being uncomfortable, and take that energy and convert it into action. And what we've done is mobilized a council of diverse employees across all aspects of our company to really inform and reshape some of the actions that we are taking, and now really moving to action. To my earlier point, we need to stop talking. We need to stop planning. We need to put a stake in the ground, and we need to begin to act. And we have 3 very specific pillars that we will hold ourselves responsible to. But it really comes from this point of listening and learning, and really embracing being uncomfortable, because it's the little bit of being uncomfortable that we feel as white men and women is a fraction of what I know my employees have dealt with their entire lives. And if we can embody a little bit of that and really drive action from that, we can create change.
That's pretty powerful in the sense, the acknowledgement that we may be having discomfort, but really reflecting the discomfort that those individuals are feeling across all parts of their lives. It does put it into perspective. We are coming to the close of our session. I'm going to ask each of you to share a closing comment as relates to Thrive, your dreams or hopes for inclusivity, diversity, and equity in our community, and or advice for those that are on the call. Teresa.
Right. That's a big loaded question. So
I know, it's big.
I guess I would say to everybody out there is, don't give up. You're never done. Just keep pounding and pounding and pounding at it. And I think it was brought before, anything that you measure will get results. So no matter what size your company is, if you start looking at this closely and counting and measuring, you'll be surprises, but you'll also see where you need to work. So focus inside your company, focus outside your company, and you're never done. It's relentless. Just keep at it.
There's no true finish line. Mike?
So many things I could say, but I'm actually feeling optimistic. I think we have to, stay optimistic, but that doesn't mean to pretend the problems aren't there. The pandemic goes away when it doesn't, but stay optimistic, because this is not the first crisis we've all experienced, and there will be more. And the way to get through these times is to see the other side. And you can't see the other side if you're not optimistic, fundamentally optimistic. Be practical, be pragmatic, but have, in your heart, a sense of optimism and know that you can get to get there, wherever that there might be for you or for your organization. And I thought what Steve said was absolutely correct. And, what I have found is you have to be authentic. And authentic means knowing who you are. And if in your heart, you know who you are as a person, as an individual, that will be revealed. And in that process, you'll achieve great things. You'll stay true to yourself, and people will see you as somebody they want to follow and somebody they want to be in business with or they want to work for. So there's a couple of thoughts.
It's a liberating statement to just be authentic with the pressure to be in a box about so many of these issues.
Yeah.
Steve?
I guess where I would go, and I can link the two, and I think this is probably what was at the heart of the idea that Kent brought forward to the founding CEOs was, listen, to what's going on around you, and with that, gain an understanding, but most importantly, learn. Be open to what's going on in our communities, what's going on in people's lives, and really educate yourself around what that true need is. And then put in place a set of actions that you then commit to start to drive. And we've talked a lot about some really good ones here around workforce development, thinking about equity across all aspects of an employee's journey within a company, and really thinking about how you can have an impact on the community that we all live and work in.
Thank you. Dan, I'm going to let you have the last word on this one.
Well, Unfortunately, my last word might not be as optimistic as Mike and the others. I am optimistic that we're going to come through this economic situation fine. Those who are, in the have department are going to be fine, both from a company standpoint and an economic standpoint. But I'm less optimistic that we're really on the path to deal with the broader kind of gap between those who are the beneficiaries of the good that goes on in our economy and those who have been being left behind. I think too many people are expecting others to figure it out. When at the end of the day, what it's really going to come down to is everyone doing what they can. Even in the conversation I mentioned earlier, they want to know what I was going to do. I don't know that they really put much thought in what they want to do about it. And we all have to do a whole bunch to turn this corner. The technology change that we're going to be going through is going to make this harder to deal with, not easier. There's going to be a lot more jobs that are threatened by technology in the future than even have in the past. So we're all going to have to kind of roll up our sleeves, do some soul searching, and ask ourselves, what can each of us as individuals, small company, big company, tech, not tech, what can we do to make a difference? And if we don't, we're probably going to have repeats of what's been happening the last several months.
Well, here's what I'm taking from today. First, be bold. Second, give each other a little bit of grace as we all are vulnerable in these conversations. And then third, be pragmatic and get something done. And those sound like the values that Thrive has set up. I think we as a community owe you all a great deal of thanks for taking a leadership role on such an important issue. You have companies to run, businesses to grow, employees to care for, and yet you're stepping back and looking at the big picture, and you're committed to making a difference. And I believe that inspires everybody to do the same. So on behalf of Denver Startup Week, Teresa, Mike, Steve, Dan, thank you for helping Colorado thrive.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks, Tammy. See everybody.
Take care.
Bye. Take
Hi,
care.
everyone.